Now is a more
another scare campaign for Mr. Howard.
Family values to stand up and be counted.
Hello, welcome to YouDecide 2007's coverage of the federal election. This is where you report and you decide, and we try to interpret. And to help tonight we have, as always, John Harrison, Dale Spender and Carolyn Marohasy. And our first segment tonight, we're going to look at one of the marginal seats in Brisbane, the seat of Moreton. Okay, so this is the question of race, this is the question of dog whistling. John, you might explain to us what dog whistling is in the first place.
Well, Graham, dog whistling is where you send a message in coded language that only part of the population really understands. It's apparently inoffensive. So, for example, Kevin Andrews' statement that the Sudanese were not fitting in was a dog whistle. It looked on the surface to actually be a reasonable proposition, but it was also designed to actually create a bit of a furore and for people to say, yes, well, we can't have the Sudanese immigration. It was essentially designed to raise the question of race.
But do the Sudanese fit in? I mean, does anyone have any experience of Sudanese? I mean, I know I see them playing, I live very close to Moreton, I see them playing soccer down by Norman Creek on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, I think the first statement was sort of relatively innocuous, but then when he was asked to defend it, and he had no research, no evidence, those sorts of things, that's when I think people started to get uncomfortable with this statement, because you can say tall people don't fit in or short people don't fit in, and then what's your evidence? You know, well, they bang their heads or they can't get up the steps of buses or something. But he didn't have any basis for saying that, and also his own unease with any sort of difference was displayed as he talked about it. So it was as much about his inability to be innocent, I think. I mean, it was very calculated.
And this gets complicated, doesn't it, when you're, might not be complicated in some areas in Australia which are basically dominantly Anglo still, but Moreton, and interestingly the Prime Minister's own seat of Bennelong, quite multicultural, aren't they?
And you can't make statements that are going to offend people on the basis of ethnicity anymore.
As we saw from that segment, the Chinese population in Moreton is quite significant. In fact, some areas of Moreton, it's 50% of suburbs like Stretton. So what might keep part of the population happy keeps another part of the population
very
unhappy.
Distressed, yes.
And there's a shift in the rhetoric too, Graham, so that you actually can't get away with an anti-Asian immigration line anymore, because so many Asian populations are well integrated into the Australian community.
But isn't that what the government said? Isn't that what the government said? They said, hang on, we're not being racist here. We took away from the Sudanese, but we've actually given it to some of the East Asians. And therefore the total mix in terms of European, non-European hasn't changed. Caroline?
Well, I mean, just correct the point. What's the definition of fitting in? Because if our definition of not fitting in is that the Sudanese are hanging out together, they're you know, they're sort of not extending their social network beyond other Sudanese, well, isn't that what a lot of those seats in Chinese in Moreton, you walk in there and yeah, there are lots of Chinese shops and it's in Chinese writing, and we'll...
So the Chinese don't fit in, so we should...
Well, what's our definition of fitting in then? I mean, if he's going to say that, then who else does he have to apply that to?
In the case of the Sudanese, I mean, the fitting in can actually be they are more noticeable in a predominantly white community. That's what he's really saying, and that's what people suddenly start to think.
Aren't the Chinese noticeable? I mean, I hear people complaining that when you go to high school,
the
Chinese run away with all the intellectual prizes. Isn't that a bit more threatening in a sense than... The
other thing that sort of moderates that in Australia, of course...
So it doesn't threaten you, it actually
emboldens
you, empowers you,
I think if you
challenges you.
We can't say they don't fit in because they're winning.
No, but if you have Chinese students who are outperforming Australian students, I think that says more about the Australian students than it does about the Chinese. And I think that we have to raise our game and not go, well, this is just not on, you're going to have to come down to our level so we feel better about ourselves.
Or change the exams.
It doesn't work like that.
So for me, one of the conundrums about the Howard time is that while you've had this dog whistle going back to probably the Tampa in 2001, they've actually run quite an extensive migration program, so we have somewhere around 250,000 extra people coming to
no
Australia every year.
mileage in that. I mean, this isn't necessarily because they believe it. This is because they think it might have some mileage, which is what a dog whistle actually is. You don't have to believe it. It's about you think you'll arouse passion in some people and they'll identify with you and think that you're going to do the right thing about it.
It's a political strategy.
But
The
in a
dog whistle
sense-
is a strategy.
In a sense, hasn't the migration policy, blunted isn't the right word,
Cancelled out?
but cancelled out the dog whistle? Isn't that what we're seeing in Moreton?
Look, we've had an immigration policy in Australia ever since the Second World War that's been very effective and very successful. John Howard has a fundamental level of being uncomfortable with people of difference or people who are different, and I think that that's reflected in the sorts of things he said about Asian immigration, and it's reflected across the board by a number of people in his government.
Except if you need people for the economy.
Oh,
Except
yes.
if you need skills.
Yes.
Except, I mean, it's a matter of pragmatics.
And that's what
It's not a matter
Afrikaner mining
necessarily
engineers are for.
of choice. It's about, bringing in people who can fit in terms of skills and doing things for the economy. And it doesn't much matter what the other characteristics are. They're different rules for different games here that you've actually got going.
But isn't it legitimate to look at people on a
Oh,
skills
I'm not
basis?
saying it's not legitimate.
I mean, you
I
don't
think
want
you
people
should
here who
know.
aren't going to help the economy, who are going to be a
Well, no,
drag on, do you?
you've got
Well, I
core
think it's
immigrants and you've got
more than that.
non-core immigrants. And the Sudanese are quite clearly non-core immigrants as far as John Howard's concerned.
What about the effect that the high immigration, just to move on a little bit, has on things like
Housing.
infrastructure and housing?
housing.
Caroline, I'm
Education.
assuming you don't have a house.
No, I don't have a house. If you've got one lying around, though, I mean, you know, throw it my way, but no, I don't have a house. Certainly, yeah, interesting arguments about, well, we don't have enough houses. Everyone knows that. It's not a new game. But at the same time, the government refuses to develop
Public housing.
public housing
Yeah.
and land that isn't. I mean, yeah, we've got absolutely millions and millions of land of forestry, and it's a question of development versus keeping it. And it's not just about keeping all of that. It's not about having all houses. It's about finding the right balance. And
Tell you a plan.
And it's
Yeah.
also not just about houses, but it's about public transport infrastructure and it's about health and education services. And
public transport is absolutely
Public
deplorable. As a uni student, you'll stand there in the morning and 2 buses will go past you. Stand there waiting for 45 minutes until one of them isn't too full to take you on.
That's not a federal government responsibility, that's the Liberal Party controlled Brisbane City Council.
Yeah, but
Okay.
they're telling us to
All
catch
right.
a bus.
We'll
Why?
be back after the break with a segment looking at the party's policies on the environment.